So it is amazing to me that there are people in the mainstream media who still haven't gotten the memo that it's time to put partisanship aside and work together across party lines to fight the coronavirus. Then again, these are the same people who accused Trump of doing too much in February and then did a complete 180 to accuse him of not doing enough in March. These anti-Trump Democrats are now parroting Chinese Communist Party talking points, accusing Trump of spreading xenophobia and racism for correctly stating that the Wuhan or Chinese coronavirus originated in Wuhan, China. Now, President Trump is doing everything he can to use the powers as the executive and the emergency powers that Congress has given him to swiftly react and respond to the coronavirus. Today, President Trump announced that he had signed an executive order to force private companies to produce and provide the federal government with medical equipment that is vitally needed to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. But one of the first questions that Trump got at this press conference was asking him, and I quote, whether he felt responsible for, quote, dozens of examples of bias against Chinese Americans in this country.
We're nowhere near it.
Okay, why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Your own aide, Secretary Azar, says he does not use this term. He says ethnicity does not cause the virus. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China. I want to be accurate.
About Chinese
Yeah,
Americans
please,
in
John,
this country?
please.
The aides behind you. Are you comfortable with this term?
I have great love for all of the
Here it
people
comes.
from our country. But as you know, China tried to say at one point, maybe they stopped now, that it was caused by American soldiers. That can't happen. It's not going to happen. Not as long as I'm president. It comes from China. John, please.
As you can see, that is not a joke. Immediately after Trump announced he was using unprecedented powers given to him by the Defense Production Act, he was asked whether he felt responsible for dozens of examples of bias. The real question I want to know is how many lives have been lost because of the fake news like this that is being peddled around the country. Now, I don't know what the number is. I don't know if that's even knowable, but I have a really big feeling that it's a non-zero number. Organizations that are this big and powerful cannot put partisanship above public health and not have a huge impact. Take this article that the New York Times ran on February 5th as an example. Who says it's not safe to travel to China? Here's the first paragraph in the article. The coronavirus outbreak seems defined by two opposing forces: the astonishing efficiency with which the travel industry connects the world, and a political moment dominated by xenophobic rhetoric and the building of walls. Instead of talking about the efficacy of controlling a pandemic spread around the world, this author chose to focus on, Trump's fetish for bricklaying and masonry. The left's argument was that if you avoid making contact with Asian people or cancel your vacations to China, then you are, for some reason, a racist. So how many people do you think went out of their way specifically to hang around in Chinese restaurants, shake Asian people's hands, or even travel to China specifically to show the world that they are not racist? Yes, I know that sounds ridiculous, but white guilt to a liberal can be an incredibly motivating influence. How many people read articles like this and believed that it was still safe to go on cruise ships? Now, as I said, that number will never be truly knowable, but I also don't think it's zero. Even today, the fake news cares more about hurting Trump than helping the country. During a conference call, Donald Trump told all 50 states' governors that the federal government would help them acquire more ventilators for their hospitals to deal with the predicted spread of the virus. Now, in extreme cases, COVID-19 can cause pulmonary fibrosis, which can make it impossible for patients to breathe. Ventilators are used to manually breathe for the patients to give them long enough time for their bodies to start recovering. Now, Trump said that the federal government will continue working with states to get them as many ventilators as they need. But he also said that if states have their own supply chains and their own means of acquiring them themselves, that might be faster than going through the federal government. And that if they have that option, they should take it. A lot of President Trump's response to the coronavirus has been to rip away the bureaucratic red tape that's been preventing the FDA and the CDC from mounting an effective response. But instead of reporting the quote accurately, the New York Times cut the quote in half and ran this headline: Trump to governors on respirators. Try getting it yourselves. Now, removed from the entire context of the conversation, that looks really bad, and that is by design. Of course, leftists took the bait. Within minutes of this article being posted on the New York Times, thousands of liberals were sharing it on social media and perpetuating the falsehood that President Donald Trump was leaving states out to dry. This entire headline is designed to take advantage of people's confirmation bias. Now, confirmation bias is when you have your own internalized biases and you see something and your mind fills in the gaps and fills in the spaces between the lines to make assumptions that confirm your own biases. For example, Trump did something bad. If you think he's a racist, then you will presume that that bad thing was done out of racism. Now, there was no correction offered. That headline is still there. Millions of Americans read this headline, and a large chunk of them believed what the headline suggested, that Donald Trump is leaving states out to dry. As I said, COVID-19 can cause pulmonary fibrosis in extreme cases. What this headline is suggesting is that if people get coronavirus, they will not be able to breathe, and it will be because of Donald Trump. There are real-world consequences for stirring up these kinds of anxieties. This is nothing but spreading false truths, deliberately designed to stir up people's confirmation biases, all to drive clicks to a website during a crisis. Is it possible to add up a body count for these kind of fake news stories? President Trump has called the fake news the enemy of the American people. They hated him for saying it, but this proves that Donald Trump was right. The Washington Post's new slogan is that democracy dies in darkness. But the real question is how many Americans have died or will die because the mainstream media used their power to shine a light on topics and stories specifically designed to hurt the president instead of protecting the American people. Now, liberals have no problem with the fact that mayors and governors around the country are using their emergency powers to restrict citizens' rights. For example, in many states, it is now illegal to congregate in public areas of more than 10 or in some cases 50 people, even though the Constitution, the First Amendment, gives every American the right to peaceably assemble. Likewise, in cities like Champaign, Illinois, and New Orleans, Louisiana, those local governments have now declared they have the power to suspend gun sales within the city limits to prevent a panic over the coronavirus. Again, liberals have no problem with the fact that emergency powers are used to curtail the Second Amendment rights of Americans. The real question is why the fake news media should not be held to the same kind of standards. If we're going to live in a world where emergency powers trump the full enjoyment of your First Amendment rights, why should fake news media outlets be allowed to spew this nonsense, stir up the anxieties of the American people, all for a political gain? Why should they be allowed to do it? And the answer is that they shouldn't. The mainstream media should not have a free pass to stir up panic in a time of crisis and to spread lies deliberately designed to score political points. When you look at this article, it is telling the American people that the President of the United States is not there to help him and that their own state governors should fend for themselves. It is a disgusting abuse of power, and I am far more worried about this than people congregating in groups of 10 to express their political opinions or someone running to the gun store to buy a handgun because they want to defend their family. I am way more concerned about what will happen if the fake news is allowed to continue doing this. Now, this crisis will pass. All crises pass. Every stock market decline is followed by an upswing. We will defeat this virus. The question is, what kind of country do we want to live in the meantime? And what do we want our country to be like after we have defeated it? Do we want the mainstream media to continue to be able to perpetuate these falsehoods? And do we want them to get away with this? Do we want to let them get away with pushing these fake narratives, politicizing a crisis, all to score political points? I say no. Now, you're free to disagree with me. You're free to say that the First Amendment is absolute and that you can do nothing to stop fake news media outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post from spewing this nonsense. And in a perfect world, I would agree with you. But since we already are accepting the fact that governments can restrict our rights in a time of emergency, they should start with media outlets like this and leave the rest of us the hell alone.